Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM podcast.
Thanks very much for joining us for the Turkish Grand Prix post-race discussion. It's funny to think that it was Istanbul Park last year that Hamilton drove one of the best races of his career to take championship number 7. And this year, we're nowhere near deciding this championship just yet. And it was Valtteri Bottas, our 6th Grand Prix winner this season, who took the Turkish delight this time around. His first win of the season. And I think his first wet weather win of his career as well. And of course, this was on World Porridge Day, so clearly it was
incredible.
Clearly it was meant to be. So Shane and I are here to, as usual, to go over all the details of this intriguing strategic battle. So let's get started.
Right, like always, let's dive straight into qualifying. And it was an interesting tale, the Turkish Grand Prix, because like you said, coming from last year, we were expecting a bit of a slippery surface, weren't we? But that's not what we were presented with at all. The track has matured over the last year, and these drivers are finding all the grip in the world. But the top 3 pretty much stayed the same. Hamilton with a brilliant qualifying lap, which puts him in pole position, but not, which we'll talk about later on. Bottas in P2, with Verstappen closely following behind in P3. What was your highlight of qualifying there, Alex?
I must confess I did not catch qualifying, so I was very much catching up on it after the fact. I was very impressed to see Fernando Alonso, who was going to start P5. I think that's his best start in that car and his best start for a long time. Gasly again with another fantastic lap. Was going to start P4, obviously, because of Hamilton's engine penalty. But it was a bit more disappointing again for a couple of drivers. Perez again didn't really feel like he capitalised, was about half a second off his teammate. Was starting P6, which wasn't so bad, but it would have been P7 if it wasn't for Hamilton's penalty. Not too much to report. It wasn't particularly unusual. I suppose Russell was probably a bit disappointed not to get further. Normally, I think this is the first weekend we didn't hear the words Mr. Saturday.
Very true. He was on a very fast lap, a second up on his previous best time, and he got to the last corner and just went wide off the track. And where I think some drivers would absolutely floor it to the finish line, he just backed out altogether, which I'm not sure whether that's the right thing to do or not. I think you should maybe try to complete a lap, and then whether it gets disallowed can be discussed after the matter. But he just took it upon himself to not complete the lap and just to trundle across the line, which was a shame, and he was straight on the radio and apologised to the team. Schumacher, on the other hand, put in the Haas in Q2 for the second time this year, which is absolutely incredible. It just goes to show that a little bit of damp conditions or uneasy conditions can really tighten the field, especially at the rear of the pack. And we've got Schumacher in P14. Unfortunately, his teammate, Mazepin, couldn't quite do the same.
No, well, that's not a huge surprise, but Mick Schumacher did well to sneak in there. But otherwise, not really any massive surprises for qualifying. And like you say, that top 3 just seemed to slam home the Mercedes dominance at this track, this particular weekend.
I do have a question for you, Alex. It's a bit of a talking point, straight from qualifying, about qualifying. How do you feel that Lewis Hamilton was the fastest man on track during qualifying, and yet he wasn't awarded pole position? I understand that obviously he had a penalty because he had to take a 4th internal combustion engine, and he received a 10-place grid penalty to that. But according to the rule book and statistically, he hasn't secured pole position for the race because he had this penalty, because he had attracted this penalty before the race had begun. If he had before qualifying, if he had attracted that penalty between qualifying and the race, he would still be awarded pole position because he's qualified first and then taken a penalty. It's very strange, that, isn't it? What's your whole thoughts on it? I think Lewis got caught out in an interview, actually, when they said to him, how do you feel that you've set the fastest lap of the day, but you're not going to be awarded pole position? And he was taken back by it.
Yeah, I thought that it was the case that you got pole if you were starting first for the race.
Okay, yep.
And so that is technically pole position. The fact that they can take a penalty in between Saturday and Sunday and still gain pole position by the statistics, I wasn't aware of that, but
It's interesting, isn't it?
It's one of those interesting rules. Technically, I suppose, to be on pole, you actually have to be there on the day.
Yep.
But I'm sure they're not going to be complaining too much. Not only because Lewis Hamilton is not short of a pole position or two, but also it was good news for Mercedes because it was clear that they had the faster car there that weekend. So that bode well for the race for them.
And great news for Bottas as well, who put it in P2 and then was awarded P1 at the end of the day.
Yeah, he was the sort of the big winner from that, I suppose, with the clear track ahead of him come Sunday.
Not to mention Carlos Sainz also took an engine penalty whilst we're talking about qualifying, but he replaced every part of the makeup of the engine. So instead of having a 10-place grid penalty, he was starting from the back of the grid because of the accumulated total of grid penalties. I've seen a lot of stuff online about how Sainz and Verstappen, when they took engine penalties, start from the back of the grid, but when Hamilton took an engine penalty, he started from 11th. I think people need to realise that Hamilton switched out one part of I think it's 5 or 6 parts of the engine, and the other drivers switched out every single part, so they attracted a bigger penalty. So just to clear that up, there's no British bias. Well, there is on Sky Sports, everyone, but not from the FIA's perspective.
And Daniel Ricciardo did the same as well, didn't he? He ended up starting from the back of the grid.
Which makes sense, I guess, doesn't it, given his poor qualifying position anyway?
Yeah. Whether that has anything to do with the state of the components on the day, I don't really know. But yeah, he did the same thing and was starting P20. Now, moving on, I just wanted to talk very briefly about something special that we had for this weekend.
Did we have something special?
We did. We had the Red Bull special livery.
Oh, yeah, for the Japanese Grand Prix.
Yeah, it was meant to be for the Japanese Grand Prix. It would have been this weekend. Because Red Bull are actually continuing with Honda to some extent, aren't they? It appears that they have some kind of license to use Honda's technology up to the point that the engine regulations change again. But it does nonetheless mean that we will see Red Bull being propelled by their own powertrains from next season. They will be Red Bull powertrains, which is pretty cool. So to see Honda off again from Formula One, they had a little special livery, this white livery with a sort of the rising sun, as it were, on the edge of the monocoque. And what did you think of the livery, Shane? Did it make a nice change from a Red Bull livery that we pretty much see look exactly the same year after year?
I tell you what, I do welcome special liveries. We saw McLaren in Monaco, which was great. I have to say, when I came home from work and I put on the practice, I initially thought I was watching a Haas go round. I thought that Haas looks pretty good. That looks pretty stable. And then I realised it was the Red Bull. So it took a while to get to make sure I wasn't getting confused with those two cars and the Alfa Romeo as well. Because now we've got last week we had 6 white cars on the grid, so it was getting a little bit confusing. However, that aside, yeah, I quite enjoyed the livery. It wasn't the best they've ever done. They've done Star Wars in the past. They've done their camo livery in the past. They've done a purpley bluey one as well, which I quite enjoyed. This one, it was nice. I can see why they did it. It's a shame that it wasn't at the Japanese Grand Prix, but we obviously can't race there this year. Not one of their strongest liveries, but I do welcome special liveries, and it's a win-win for the team, really, isn't it? Because if you do well with a special livery, you're on the TV all the time, and all your sponsors are being shown everywhere. If you do bad with a special livery, you're also on TV all the time. Your sponsors are being shown everywhere, so the team can't lose.
Yeah, we've had a few this season. I think the Golf McLaren is probably still my favourite so far. There was a slightly understated Alfa Romeo one for Italy, wasn't there, where they had the
yes,
they had the extra little bit of green for their logo.
I suppose the Mercedes isn't a special livery anymore, given that they've ran it for the last 2 years.
Well, it is officially their livery for this season. Isn't it? So
apparently, it might be changing next year. They might be going back to the silver arrows, which I would welcome back because the car does look good in silver, and they've said the message they need to try and portray, and obviously they're doing a lot of work internally as well to what's the is it Challenge 25? I think the ambition is for Mercedes, so it's clearly working. I quite like the black
25. Isn't that the thing where they ID you for alcohol in shops?
Maybe it's on the inside of the halo, I think, somewhere. I need to look into it.
But yeah,
later.
Basically the crux is that they have had this special livery to show intent, And now they have various programs, and Hamilton has his Hamilton Commission, and there's lots of other things happening to try and, give people more opportunities from more diverse backgrounds into Formula One. So I guess they're focusing more on actually getting something done, because whilst it's a nice gesture to have the livery and to be in support of Hamilton and to be in support of the Black Lives Matter message, which is kind of where it was born out of. Now, if they're serious about it, they actually need to, do something about it rather than just change their livery.
Yeah.
So I guess they're going back to their original livery whilst ensuring that they're actually doing something about it behind the scenes, which is fair enough. But yeah, I quite like the livery for Red Bull as well. I thought it was a nice change, seeing as the Red Bull doesn't really change year on year. And when they have good special liveries before, like their camo livery and all the rest of it, they never actually race them. They just use them in testing to make it difficult for people to see the parts and things like that. But we never actually get to see them used in anger. So it made a nice change. I thought it was amusing that, where they have the little pictures of the drivers, when they have the graphics on screen and when they have the grid list and all the rest of it. Because they clearly took the photos for the Red Bull drivers at the Turkish Grand Prix where it was a bit wet and windy. They look a little bit sort of like windswept and not too happy in their photos compared to everyone else, which was slightly amusing. But yeah, I thought it was quite nice and made a nice change, like you say. So yeah, just a quick cover off for the Red Bull white livery. All right, where are we going next?
We're going to lap 1, turn 1 with Alonso and Gasly, and what is potentially, in my opinion, the most ridiculous 5-second penalty I've ever seen being awarded on an F1 track. And I just want to talk to you about this and then get your opinion, because obviously that's what we're here to do. But it's lap 1, turn 1, strange conditions on the track because it's slightly raining. It's not properly raining. If you're British, you kind of understand what that means. It's only ever so slightly drizzling. It's a wet track. They're all on intermediate tyres. Going into turn 1, obviously everyone's trying to spot their braking point, for the first time in anger. They've obviously done an outlap, but this is, it's all very touch and go. We've got Gasly in the inside of Perez, who's on the inside of the corner, then Gasly, who's in the middle, and then you've got Alonso on the far right. And it looks like Gasly just gets a bit of understeer and goes not horrendously wide, looking at the onboard footage. Clips Alonso's rear tyre and sends Alonso into what is undoubtedly the most perfect 360 spin he could have ever asked for, given the circumstances. And cut a long story short, but Gasly receives a 5-second penalty, and I can't for the life of me figure out how this has happened, because at the start of every year, the FIA talk about how they're going to be a little bit more lenient about racing incidents and not awarding penalties too quick, especially on lap 1. They've always mentioned lap 1 is a little bit of a buffer when it comes to awarding penalties. Unless someone's done something, horrendously stupid, then we're not going to be awarding penalties. And yet what looked like a completely innocent matter was slam dunked with a 5-second penalty. And I can't believe it. Turn 1 of a wet race and 2 cars make slight contact. And here we are, 5-second penalty. What are your thoughts?
Well, first I would ask, why shouldn't he get a penalty? I'm not saying that he definitely should have done, but why shouldn't he get a penalty?
Sorry, I was expecting you to talk a little bit longer than that because I just took a mouthful of my drink. Because it was a racing incident, and these things happen, and it's turn 1.
Why is it a racing incident?
Because it was an accident. Because there was no foul play.
But that's not the definition of a racing incident.
No, but he had someone on the inside of him, and I don't think there was any driver at fault. Alonso stuck it around the outside, was running halfway off the track anyway, so it probably shouldn't have been there. It just seemed like one of those things where no one's to blame. It was a racing incident, but yet one driver got a 5-second penalty. I know Alonso dropped back further down the grid, but it just seems ridiculous if you're asking me.
Yeah, every time I think that my opinion has sort of solidified more on the penalties and racing incident thing, but I know we have another incident that makes me sort of less sure about where I stand on it. In a way, Gasly's penalty appears to be a sign of the kind of consistency that a lot of fans who have complained about penalties not being given have been asking for, because I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the leniency that they give on lap 1, because it's not clear. It's just another vagary of the rules, isn't it? How much leniency do they give? what constitutes something getting a penalty and what doesn't on lap 1, and why should we forgive them on lap 1? What is the logic behind letting people get away with things on lap 1? I'm not really fully aware of what the rules are. I've certainly not been able to find exactly any specific mention of what they consider to be, allowable on lap 1. Because, for example, Bottas misjudging his braking at Hungary, clearly he got a penalty for that. That was on lap 1. They weren't going to be lenient about that. They weren't going to be lenient about Alonso hitting Schumacher.
He took out half a dozen cars. True.
Yeah, obviously Bottas, the example with Bottas is far more extreme. It's far more obvious.
I feel like the Alonso-Schumacher incident, which feels weird talking about Alonso and Schumacher, but actually talking about Mick instead of Michael, was Alonso went for an audacious move. He had attempted a move which I didn't think was possible. He put himself in an awkward situation and actually took out another car by attempting a move, whereas Gasly, Perez and Alonso were all just turning around turn 1. Like they were following
I'm not sure how much of a factor Perez is in this, really, because if you look at the onboards from other cars, Gasly and Perez aren't that close together, really.
Okay.
And Gasly is ahead of Perez, and Alonso is alongside him almost the entire way around the corner. So it's not like Gasly hasn't seen Alonso or he's focusing on Perez. There's a fair distance between the two of them. Gasly's claim that he was sandwiched is just not true. He wasn't stuck between two cars and couldn't go anywhere. He had basically picked a braking point that meant that when he turned, he had understeered into Alonso. If that were any other lap of the race and that had happened, then I think there would have been reasonable cause for a penalty there. But because it's lap 1, it's okay. So why is that?
I don't know.
I don't really understand.
I don't understand either. But I just feel like what we're doing is highlighting the inconsistency from the FIA throughout this 2021 season, because we've seen drivers receive penalties for far less and drivers receive no penalties for bigger, issues.
Yeah, I think the leniency on lap 1 is a strange one.
Whilst we're talking about penalties, really quickly now, Mazepin on Hamilton, whilst Hamilton was lapping him, going through, I can't remember for the life of me what turn it is. I think it's turn 10, which is flat. It's a flat right-hander. Kink onto the back straight, and Mazepin was being lapped, but decided to pull into Lewis Hamilton's way, and Hamilton had to come off the accelerator and take avoiding action. What's your thoughts on that?
He didn't so much as get in his way as didn't give up the racing line. What he did wasn't really against the rules, because I don't think you're required to immediately give up the position when you see a blue flag. You get so many marshals posts or something before you get a penalty. I think the impression that I get from watching it was that Mazepin just didn't want to give up the drier line in such a faster corner, because he might have got onto the wetter tarmac and found himself in a bit of a spin, and he knew that he still had some time perhaps to let Hamilton by, so didn't want to give up the dry line that early. It's hard to say. There's obviously all the conspiracy theories come out that he's doing it on purpose to irritate other people, but I don't really see why.
I don't believe that for a second. I just it was a slightly controversial move on track, which has caused a couple of talking points.
It's just one of those things where what he's done is not really against the rules. It's maybe a little ungentlemanly, but I can see why in that situation,
is it more
in that car,
unsporting?
He might not want to give up that dry line on such a fast corner. So maybe that was it. I don't know. That's my guess.
That certainly makes more sense. I think it was more like unsporting or ungentlemanly than it was a cold hard.
It's a little unsporting, but it's not against the rules, and I don't think he should get a penalty for it, because what would he be getting a penalty for?
What, go from the back of the grid to the back of the grid?
Yeah, exactly. But also just, he hasn't broken any of the rules.
True.
When the blue flags come out, you're not required to immediately get out the way. It's just considered sporting to do it as early as possible. But you actually have, I can't remember the exact rule. It's something so many marshal posts or something.
Yeah.
Before you have to have given it up, otherwise you do get a penalty. And then there's the other thing about impeding other drivers, and it just goes to show how nebulous the rules are, really.
Especially when we're quite big fans of the sport, and yet we're there like, what does this rule apply to at what point on track, and does it matter on lap 1? Does it not matter on lap 1? we're, very big fans of the sport, and yet we can't quite figure out what the rules actually mean and where the leniency is and why there is any leniency. It's a good talking point. I'm glad that we've got this conversation going, and there's a lot more to talk about in this race.
There's so much information as well that we don't get access to because the stewards have more information than the fans do. But a lot of that information is not revealed to anyone. For example, they may have a conversation with the drivers and they'll provide a sort of simplified version of it when they give out their stewards' notes, but we don't get to see everything that goes into making the decision. And that human element, that human error factor,
and it could be
is always going to be present. You can't not have it, really.
It could be as simple as Mazepin being called to the steward's office and saying, if I'd given up that line, I would have been on the wet side of the track. I would have had a spin at probably 180 miles an hour. And I was worried I wasn't going to be in control of my car. What's more dangerous?
Yeah.
Okay, conversation over. We'll move on.
So that's a controversial one because it involves a controversial driver. But
yeah.
It's not a huge deal, I don't think.
Right, moving on from the controversial stuff. What's on your list for the next talking point?
Well, I'll continue the penalty talk. We'll confine all the penalty stuff to this one bit because Alonso ended up getting a penalty for his contact with Mick Schumacher, which is a lot more of a slam dunk penalty, really, because he went for a move that wasn't really on. Schumacher was going to have to turn into that corner at some point. So, and then basically, it was pretty clear that was not a responsible move by Alonso. So
they shared a hug at the end of the race. They shared a hug at the end of the race. I think that was I'm really sorry. I'm a 2-time world champion. I should have known better. Hug.
But we also saw some contact between Sainz and Vettel later on that some people were claiming should have been a penalty because, Sainz was getting past Vettel and he had pretty much got the move done. But as he went across the curb, I think lost the rear end a little bit and just slid gently into Vettel. I think the reason Sainz got away with this one was, despite having that wobble and did lose control of his car very briefly, it wasn't the contact that meant that he took the position.
No, he'd already
secured it. It wasn't like he barged into Vettel and then got past. He was already past him and essentially lost a little bit of control and then understeered sort of gently into him. I can only assume that's why he didn't get a penalty because it didn't contribute to him gaining the position or not. Again, I don't really know exactly where that stands on the rules, but that is my guess based on why he didn't get a penalty for that. Did you think that was penalty worthy?
I honestly didn't even consider it because I thought, like you said, the move was done. It was clear that he went over. He put two wheels on the curb and just lost the control of the car ever so slightly, and then it was more of a bump into Vettel, who came off with no damage. As far as we're aware, didn't have to pit immediately, which he had the opportunity to do because it was just before the pit entrance. So he came off pretty good. And like you said, the move was already done, so it was just a slight lost control of the car. It wasn't like he charged in like Alonso did on Schumacher.
Yeah, I think we'd be prepared to accept more of these inconsistencies if some of the inconsistencies weren't so horrific.
Inconsistent.
The example that we've used quite a few times is Leclerc hitting Gasly at the start of the Austrian Grand Prix, which is on lap 1, and that's just he knocked him out in a straight line. So it's just a pretty slam dunk. But was he given leniency because it was lap 1? Did the stewards just not spot it? Did nobody report it? How did he get away with that? I don't know.
No idea.
We don't know. That information is just never made available. So we end up somewhat in the dark no matter what happens, it feels like. But yeah, that's about it for penalties. There's enough penalty chat. We always end up having a penalty conversation every race.
Yeah, we do, to be fair.
What can be done about penalties in F1, I have no idea. But
Clean slate
it does not
next
make
year
for entertaining conversation, that's for sure.
It certainly does. Every year we're like, right, this year there'll be some consistency 4 races later. Okay, next year there'll be some consistency.
Yeah. Okay, what's next?
I'm going to talk about the most Ferrari radio conversation I think we've ever heard in Formula One, especially in recent times. And we don't have to talk about this for a long period. This is just a quick snippet, and I think we all know what we're talking about. Charles leading the race, doing a fantastic job. To be fair, the Ferrari has been very strong this weekend. And I'm sure you'll bring up our 2 weekly or racely weekly report of the McLaren and Ferrari battle later on in the podcast. But Charles was doing a fantastic job, leading in P1 after Bottas had boxed and came out on fresh intermediates. Charles was on the radio to his engineer and mentioned he just asked if he had maintained the same pace for the rest of the race, where would he finish? And his engineer had a really big brain moment and said, well, if you don't let Bottas pass, you'll stay in P1. And I thought to myself, I'm sure he knows this. He can see Bottas in his mirrors. He knows he's in P1. Surely he knows. It's not what he's asking, is it? Let's be honest. It's not what he's asking. He's asking if he's a second slower per lap for the remaining 15 laps. Where's he going to finish? P1 or P7? And yet Ferrari was just like, typical Ferrari. Nope. If you don't let Bottas pass, you will finish in P1.
Well, that does answer his question, doesn't it?
It does answer the question, but surely they knew that he wasn't after that information. Of course, if you don't let P2 pass, you're going to stay in P1. I think he just wanted to know what his deficit was like and what's likely to happen throughout the rest of the race, which I'm sure they had that data.
I assume what the engineer meant was if you keep up your pace and Bottas does pass you, you'll be P2. Maybe that's what he kind of meant, much further, but didn't say it.
I think Charles was asking how much further down would he drop if he was to maintain the current lap pace and compared to the cars around him. I just thought it was a very strange, and obviously we only hear snippets of the radio conversation unless it's Lewis Hamilton, and then we hear an awful lot throughout the weekend. That is the wrong British bias we don't want to bring into the sport. But it's just classic Ferrari, isn't it? I just found it hilarious, and I've seen like a lot of social media reacting exactly the same way. That's not what Charles was after. It was
pretty amusing.
Yeah. I'd love to be the person who makes the decision on what radio plays during the race. Because they probably listened to that and thought, that is absolutely gold dust. That'll be memed for the rest of the year. This is going to be great for the views. Play this. And it was hilarious.
It reminds me of Toto Wolff. I think it was in Russia when he messaged Bottas and was like, Valtteri, this is Toto, pass the cars ahead for points. Yeah, that's normally how racing works, yeah.
Yeah, the guy's been in Formula 1 for half a dozen years now. He's pretty aware how it works.
I don't know, sometimes it does feel like he could do with the reminder, to be honest.
Not on weeks like today.
But not this week, to be fair.
Not this week. Is that a smooth transition?
Yeah, what a segue. Well, actually, I'm going to, unless you want to say any more about Ferrari's
no, I just wanted a quick
strategy call.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the sort of pit stop strategy battle in general, because there's quite a lot to talk about in terms of pit stops, because that was very
not
much
if you're
Ocon. No, not if you're Ocon, but that was very much what the race was hinging on. Really, I was kind of hoping that we'd get to see a dry race this time around, because Istanbul Park is a great track, and I wanted to see these cars racing at the limit around there, and the circuit has a decent number of overtaking opportunities. But wet races are always interesting as well. So we had another slippery one with unusual conditions. It wasn't really raining hard, like you said. The track wasn't soaking, but it also wasn't really drying out much. So there was obviously going to be big calls on whether or not people were going to take the gamble, when they were going to change their inters. There was going to be that period of time where they experienced graining, and then the tyres essentially became slicks, but still kind of worked in the conditions. And so that led to some interesting pit calls throughout the race. Just to start off then, which team do you think executed the strategy for the conditions the best on Sunday?
Oof. That is a tough one. I could probably give you a list of teams who definitely didn't, but who did it the best? I think Bottas' side of Mercedes, or Red Bull did a pretty solid strategy.
Which team?
Red Bull.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think Red Bull with their
they had a fantastic pit stop as well. Given the new regulations, 2.1 seconds. With the new regulations, they've nailed it. They're back to their solid
Even
ways.
The cameraman was celebrating.
That was so funny.
So yeah, Red Bull definitely made it pretty smooth from their side strategy-wise. We also saw another amusing moment as Vettel went for mediums in one of the most bizarre pit calls of the season so far. Completely completely wrong. He didn't really have a good race overall, Vettel. He was a bit
This
off
just
the
made it
pace
worse.
overall. And I think they just wanted to see if they could go for it. We didn't hear any radio calls beforehand, so I'm not sure if this was Vettel pushing for it or what, but they went for it, and at the moment he came out of the pits, I was like, what are you doing?
I thought that was a mistake.
Near slicks.
I honestly thought when the TV camera or when the live feed went to Vettel's car and there was mediums on, I thought, they've messed up this pit stop. There's no way any team's going to put mediums on. There's no dry line apart from out on the edge of like turn 9. There was a slight dry line appearing. Apart from that, there was no dry line at all. And it's the old timing tower with the medium tire. It's like he's crazy. This is even like not in my head. It was not even considered to be a bold strategy. It was just a stupid idea. At no point did I ever think it was going to work, and it just didn't at all.
Yeah, I don't understand that one at all. And conversely, we also had people like Ocon did eventually, and Leclerc was trying to do, was to go the whole of the race without pitting, which of course you're allowed to do under wet conditions. Normally you have to use 2 different compounds, but under wet conditions that's thrown out the window and you can go the whole race without pitting if you want to. Now Ocon, seeing as we mentioned him, I've praised him before for his good understated long runs. He was of course the only driver not to pit by the end. And his tyres, especially that front right, absolutely ruined by the end. You could see the carcass and everything. But he did grab 1 point after starting P12, so they found a way to make that work. And in that particular situation, if the gaps are there and you're figuring out, you're looking at your strategy, you're looking at the timings, looking at the pace, you're thinking, well, yeah, it's probably better not to pit and to stay out, even though near the end of the race, Ocon's pace was like falling off a cliff. But I think the gap was such that he was able to make it happen. He managed to hold on to that P10 because Giovinazzi, who had been charging his battery on the what was the final lap, but perhaps he didn't realise it. I think his team didn't tell him that it was the final lap. He thought he had one more lap and had been charging his battery, and then it was all over, and it was too late. Otherwise, I think if he'd known or had charged it a lap earlier, he might have got past Ocon in the end, because his pace was appalling by the end when he was on those tyres. But yeah, the ending result was that they made that work. So that was an interesting one. We did see someone go the whole race without pitting. And Ocon seems like a driver to do that. He does seem to go for those long runs. He seems to have a certain skill for that. Now, I suppose we must talk about, when it comes to pit stops, we must talk about Lewis Hamilton. Beware the confirmation bias when it comes to looking at this, because, of course, you can look at the situation and look at the outcome and then try and use the outcome to justify your prior position, basically. But really, Toto justified it as a conservative decision after the race to avoid disaster. They saw the tyres were really beginning to fall apart, so they obviously didn't think that was going to be the right move. He potentially might have lost more places because the pace would have been so bad on those tyres by the end. It wasn't what Hamilton wanted, obviously, and I think I'd personally trust Lewis to take those tyres to the end, for what it's worth, seeing as he's a man who knows how to look after his tyres. But the mistake was not, it wasn't about whether or not they should have pitted or stayed out or whatever. It seemed to be more about the fact that they didn't pit earlier because Hamilton didn't want to. And the team seemed to think that was a better decision. They would have come out ahead of more cars and been in a position to defend against them. So that seemed to be the mistake to me, not that whether or not they pitted or didn't pit later on at the time that they did, or whether they should have stayed out, but the fact that they didn't pit earlier. So that's it all came after that decision, as far as I'm concerned. They should have pit much earlier when Bono said that he should have done.
Yeah, it's a real tough one to look back on. Obviously, hindsight is a fantastic thing. At the time, I think they were on the radio to Hamilton. They said, "How are the tyres?" And Hamilton is like a 7-time world champion. He's been in this sport for so many years. He's driven so many cars. He's got a good idea of how his tyres are performing. And it's not like the track was at risk of getting wetter, because I think at one point it was likely that it was going to rain again, but there was no risk of rain from the second half of the race whatsoever. So the conditions were rather, were going to stay the same. And Hamilton's response to how his tyres were was they're all right. It's a bit slippy, but they're all right. Or, they're fine. It's a bit, I'm sliding a bit, but they're fine. I think, well, actually, if Hamilton's okay on his tyres, and he's the first person to jump on the radio and tell people that he's not okay on his tyres, then maybe they should have just stuck out with Hamilton's decision and gone to the end, which seemed like the best idea at the time when they were talking about bringing him in lap 52 or lap 51 with only 7 or 8 laps to go. That seemed like a really bad idea at the time, and Jensen alluded to it on the Sky Sports F1 coverage. He said, why are we bringing him now? Like, that window has passed, just like you mentioned. He should have probably boxed 10 laps before they made that decision. When Bono was on the radio offering that strategy, they should have probably pushed harder or left Hamilton to go to the end. One or the other, either bring him in early or let him go to the end. Let's not bring him in with 7 laps to go, because it was so obvious throughout the race. Drivers would come in, get 2 or 3 really rapid laps on a fresh set of intermediate tyres, and then the graining phase would kick in, and then they would get a better tyre life. But that phase was never going to return to Hamilton's car because there wasn't enough laps left in the Grand Prix.
Yeah, we shouldn't also forget the incredible pace that Hamilton had shown already up to that point. He was the fastest guy on track by some margin, and he was past Gasly on lap 15, I think it was. He was just about half a second faster than anyone else on the track. But it was when he got past Gasly and had to catch up with Perez that the trickier part came into play. So I think that was the point at which they were questioning whether or not to box and whether or not to end up in a better position. I think they said that P3 or P4 was the best that they could have hoped for. So it wasn't like they were miles behind. They didn't miss out loads, but it could have been a podium if they'd potentially pitted earlier and done things a bit differently. So
I think it's very brave when Toto came up and said, yeah, we could have had P3 or P4, because we have no idea how close this championship will get to the end of the year. And if Lewis loses it by 2 or 3 points, will they look back at Turkey and gone, if we had left Hamilton out, would we have secured those points? Or if we brought him in earlier, would we have secured those points? This is the kind of championship battle we've got now, where these handful of points to and fro at the start of the year probably won't matter as much, but now we're down to the final 6 races. All the points matter, and it's getting very interesting.
It's hard to look at those incidents in isolation, though, of course, because whilst, let's say, he goes on to lose the championship by 2 points or something, then you can look at that incident in isolation and say, oh, that's what lost us the championship. And I suppose by deficit of points, that's technically true, but none of these incidents are in isolation. They are part of a wider championship. So there are, in fact, loads of decisions that led to them losing potential points.
Yeah.
So it's
every
it's
race,
hard to see those things in isolation.
Every race where Lewis hasn't won and got fastest lap is a race where they could have lost the championship statistically. Unless you're securing maximum points a weekend, you're giving away points in the championship. So yes, it's very easy to look back on now it's how it's been and gone. But yeah, very interesting strategy. Cool. Once again for Mercedes, we've had these calls time and time again this year where Mercedes under a little bit more pressure than they used to, because they used to have such a huge margin on pace. They could be a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more forgiving with the strategy. They had a wider berth of when they could pit their drivers just because their outright pace was so much faster. And now it's not. So they're having to react and think on their feet instantly and make some pretty critical decisions.
I would say that
on the whole, they're doing a grand job. But
yeah, but at this race, it seems that it was clear that Mercedes was much faster there.
Yeah,
I mean, Hamilton was way faster than anybody else for quite a fair bit of that race. They were P1 and P2 as they were qualified, and Red Bull weren't exactly close. And Max Verstappen couldn't get anywhere near Valtteri Bottas.
Yeah.
So the general trend, if you like, is still somewhat in Mercedes' favour, because it seems like they actually still have pretty good strength in their car. So it's not all bad news, but of course, if they don't capitalise and end up with the points, then it doesn't really matter. Suffice to say that the championship continues to excite.
It certainly does.
So I can't remember if it's my turn or your turn. I think it's your turn.
I think it's my turn, but you already mentioned Hamilton and him catching up to Perez, we might as well talk about that great set of corners we were gifted in this race. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone that when it came to Hamilton and Perez, that we all held our breath for a long, long time, because we knew that Perez wanted to hold up Hamilton. And if Perez didn't want to hold up Hamilton, we knew that Red Bull had instructed him to hold up Hamilton as much as possible. And on a side note, I love at the end of the race where Perez says, I think Max owes me a couple of tequilas or a couple of drinks due to helping him out in the old championship there. But what we got was this fantastic best battle where two drivers could race really hard, and they gave each other a really good amount of room as well. Because of the nature of the track, I think they were a little bit worried to get too close to one another, especially as the huge controversy which would probably come out of it as well. But what a great couple of laps and couple of corners we had of racing, especially going around the last sector where Hamilton was alongside, outbroke Perez. Perez hung it around the outside and then was on the inside. Hamilton forced him wide into the pit lane, so Perez went across the pit lane back onto the track. This is racing. I mean, we've been gifted. Like this whole year, we've had some fantastic racing on track. We really have. And once again, we see it again. And this time in really strange conditions with two different drivers. Well, not two different drivers, but with Hamilton, the championship rival, and Max's teammate. What a great battle we had. And it just makes me happy to think about it. It was so good.
Yeah, it's probably one of the best wheel-to-wheel, maybe the best wheel-to-wheel battle of the season so far. I've no idea how Perez managed to keep that in front. It was absolutely masterful stuff. Completely changed the dynamic of the race, potentially, really. So it really was down to Perez that he was able to make it good for Red Bull as a whole, like you said. So yeah, that was fantastic. So I want to talk about. I want to go from somebody who was doing a very good job to somebody who was not doing a very good job. And I'm afraid it's Daniel Ricciardo.
Oh no, back on the Ricciardo train.
Seems to be struggling again. It's not really a track that favours the McLaren overall.
No.
But it's still a very disappointing performance. I didn't really understand the need to pit early.
No.
An example of a strategy call that I think I can say more confidently was a bad one. It appeared to be mainly based on Daniel saying that he thought he could go much faster on new inters when he was asked.
So that came over the radio, didn't it?
They just asked him, do you think you can go faster? And he was like, oh yeah, I can go much faster. But not only was he then slower and then about the same in pace, but he was lapped by his teammate. Nobody else boxed for 9 laps. And most people didn't box for about 14 or 15 laps afterwards.
Which
so
really...
don't understand why they boxed.
Which up to one point, I think Ricciardo was in P10 or P11 at one point, because the pace did come back eventually. Like I mentioned earlier, you've got that initial 2 or 3 laps of good traction, you've got the graining phase, and then the pace comes back. But towards the end of the race, all these other cars were on, worn tyres, which turned out to be okay. But Ricciardo, like you said, had been on these tyres for 15, 16 laps longer than the majority of the field. And that pace really, really hit him, because he dropped all the way back down to P13.
Yeah, he was overtaken by both Alfa Romeos on the last lap.
That's pretty bad.
So yeah, he finished out of the points there. Obviously didn't qualify well at all. But he knew that he was going to take his penalty as well, so he was going to start from the back of the grid. But whilst you had Sainz blazing through the field, who was having an absolute stunner, Daniel Ricciardo was like stuck in P16 for ages. So don't quite understand what didn't connect for him there. Maybe he just didn't like the conditions. Again, I know that the track doesn't really favour the car, but Norris managed to bring it home, P7. So again, a really big gulf between those two. And this is with a new engine that he's got in the back as well. So disappointing. More disappointment for Daniel Ricciardo. It's never good to be lapped by your teammate, whatever the situation. So still question marks there. It's there's all this, I'm back and I never went away and it was great, and the magic of Monza lives on, but you've got to be able to do it for a whole season, mate.
Yeah.
One McLaren 1-2 is great fun, but it's not going to make for a championship battle.
No, I don't have anything else to add. It wasn't a great weekend for Ricciardo. Wasn't a great weekend for McLaren in comparison to Ferrari. We had Sainz coming through the field with absolutely perfect moves time and time again into the final sector. Did have that little
I'm not
wobble
sure
with
Vettel
Vettel.
would agree, but
Yeah, I was saying we did have that little wobble with Vettel, but on the whole, Sainz had a fantastic race and he started from the back of the grid, and Ricciardo just there was no pace at all. Even when he put on a fresh set of tyres, he was only matching the leaders who had been on the same set, had been on worn tyres for 20 odd laps. So really strange set of circumstances. Hopefully Kota next week or 2 weeks' time will be more forgiving for the McLaren team, because it certainly wasn't to be in Turkey, that's for sure.
Yeah, you said I might talk later about our ongoing Ferrari versus McLaren battle, but there wasn't a Ferrari versus McLaren battle.
They were
going
nowhere
on
each other, were they?
Ferrari were much better this week, so there was no battle to be had, unfortunately. Anything else that you want to add?
I think it's only fair, especially from me, that I mention this. Now, for those of you who are long-time listeners of the podcast, I have been quite critical of a certain Valtteri Bottas over the last year or two since we've been starting this podcast. But credit where credit is due, and he has had an absolutely flawless Saturday and Sunday. I know he didn't get the fastest lap on the grid for qualifying, but he started in P1. He led pretty much every single lap of the race, made some great overtakes on Charles to get back through the grid to retake that P1, and just had that race under control from start to finish. It's a new man. Like World Porridge Day, like you mentioned, this guy had an incredible race. It's really quite sad, and this is coming from me, and I haven't been his biggest fan this year, but it's really quite sad to think that might be his last, not race win for Mercedes, but race win at all in Formula One. So I'm glad he's got it, because at one point, I didn't think he was going to get a race win this year. His first of 2021. It was a great race win in conditions which have never really suited Bottas at all. He's never really been a wet weather driver. Now, it wasn't torrential rain, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't a bone dry track either. It was very challenging conditions. And he had one snap coming out of turn one throughout the whole of the Grand Prix. And he said, apart from that one mistake, it was a perfect weekend. And I have nothing bad to say about the guy at all. Like, what a race for him. What a race for his confidence. Like, great stuff. And of course, we had the Valtteri James on the radio. But this time it was, what a race. Well done. Well deserved. It wasn't the, can you let Lewis through?
Yeah, I think that the new man hypothesis still remains to be seen. But it was a great drive from Bottas. He did do very well. He's not known for his wet weather drives, so that
Exactly.
made it particularly special. It was a bit... I felt like the reaction to him winning from the interview afterwards was a bit muted. It was they sort of immediately pointed out, oh, you did have a little slip here and the like, but there wasn't really a congratulations, Valtteri, you got your first win. They didn't seem very happy for him. I thought it was quite a muted response to his first win of the season. But
who was doing the interviews?
DC.
I tell you what, on the back of this, the commentary this week on Sky Sports was, did you watch it on Sky Sports? It was Jenson Button and...
If you want anyone commenting a wet race, it's Jenson Button.
But it was just, but it just seemed a little bit unenthusiastic. There was some great stuff going on, and Jenson was very calmly commentating it. I kind of missed the hype. I kind of missed the build-up, or like the, this is racing, this is great stuff. And it was just very well-spoken. It was very Jenson Button. It was very calm, cool, and collective.
But they got Crofty for the hype, haven't they? Crofty is all about shouting. So. True.
But yeah, just a little bit quieter on the old commentary this week. I kind of wanted a little bit more. Oh my god, this is amazing. I
don't mind. I don't mind a slightly calmer.
We'll see.
Like when they had James Hunt. He
Yeah.
was like that. He was very much just sort of matter of fact and quite polite and just said it how it was and didn't really go for the hype up, as opposed to Murray Walker, who was just a million miles an hour. He spoke faster than his brain could keep up, basically.
Which was great.
So it's that's kind of quite a good dynamic to have, really, I think, in the commentary box. But Valtteri Bottas, great drive. It was a genuinely dominant drive from the guy. Fair enough. Will it be his last win? Don't know. will he really get another chance for the rest of the season? Because if it wasn't for that engine penalty, I think it would have been Lewis Hamilton's all day long.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it remains to be seen whether or not he can do anything like that again. I hope that he can. I've said before that despite my criticisms of the guy, prove me wrong, Valtteri. I'm sure that he could not be less interested in proving me wrong personally. But, as he says, to whom it may concern, he, by all means, prove everyone wrong. Show that you can be that consistent, because the issue is not whether or not he has the quality to make it happen on this one particular race. It's whether or not he can do it every week.
That's his
or at least
ninth
consistently
win
enough to challenge
for Mercedes since joining the team.
It's
his 10th win since joining Mercedes.
Well, that's it. He's had one of the best cars, one of the most dominant cars in Formula One history for like 5 years.
Yeah.
4 of those, I suppose, it was one of the most dominant cars ever. And he's only just managed to get to double-digit wins.
And there's been, just shy of 100 races over 4 years. I think 20 plus races a year. So we've almost hit a ton races. And yet he's only achieved one in 10 races. He's almost won, or 1 in 9. So I'm not knocking the guy. I want to see more of it, because actually when Valtteri performs, he performs like very well, very calm, cool and collective. And it's like it's the cold, it's just the perfection we expect from him. It just doesn't happen very often at all.
Yeah, he's only just got more wins in his whole career than Nico Rosberg got in 2016.
Exactly.
So it's a fantastic result, but let's not, he's got more to do if he really wants to prove the critics genuinely wrong.
I did not consider the Nico Rosberg days. How I don't think I realized at the time how good this was, how good those two fighting on track was, how good it was to have that championship battle, because it's taken another 3 years to get another constructor up to the same level as Lewis Hamilton, and here we are in 2021 with a great big championship fight. And actually we had that in 2016. Yeah. And I took it for granted, Alex. I really took it for granted. And I'm not taking this year for granted. I can assure you, I will remember this year for a long time, because it's been incredible. And of course, it's the first full year we've done the podcast, which is more important. But what a year it's been.
Was it Sebastian Vettel when he won the World Championship? I can't remember which year. It might have been 2012. Where he said something over the radio at the end. Remember these days. Remember these days, because they won't last forever, and we have to remember
and he
how
was
good
right.
they were, or something. But yeah, as a general truism, that is absolutely appropriate here as well. So don't forget rather how good this whole season has been, because this is one of the best seasons of Formula One ever. I think undisputably this is one of the best ever.
And it's only going to get more tense and better due to that towards the end of the season. Hopefully
the drama continues, yeah.
That's all from me, from the talking points from my end. Do you have anything else to add to this wonderful race we had?
Nope, nothing else. Happy to move on. Okay, let's go to the view from the stands. That's enough from us. Let's hear from our loyal listeners. And we do have 2 loyal listeners who are jumping in today. We're first going to hear from @DanielFergie25, who's got in touch with us quite a few times. Thanks, Daniel. He asks, do you think Haas made a mistake keeping Mazepin on board for another season after his on-track affairs with other drivers, and making his number one mission to simply piss off the other 19 drivers on the grid since his arrival early in the season? Well, this is kind of a two-parter, really, isn't it? Just dealing with the second half of it. I don't know if he's made it his number one mission to piss off the other 19 drivers on the grid, because that would be a very strange mission to have. But I'm going to assume that you're being slightly tongue-in-cheek there. The main bulk of it, though, is, has Haas made a mistake? Well, no, absolutely not, because Mazepin being in that seat is because of his father buying a huge stake in the team. And that's meant that Haas has stayed in Formula One, which has kept them in the sport and has kept a lot of people in their jobs. So it's not a mistake. It's the reason that they're still in Formula One. Is it a mistake perhaps in the long term? Hard to say, because when Lance Stroll first came into Formula One, he was very unpopular. as well. Oh, he's just just there because of daddy's money. He wasn't really rated as a driver. He's been in Formula One some time now, and I think he's earned the respect of quite a few people on the grid because he's shown that he's actually not too bad. He's certainly, I'd say, he's been more consistent than Sebastian Vettel as his teammate. Like, Vettel's had the big moments where he's gotten to the podium and the like, but in terms of consistency and scoring points, Stroll is more consistent than Vettel. So he's not doing too badly, I'd say. Will we see Mazepin reach a similar growth level? Maybe. He doesn't really show any signs of brilliance, does he? But then again, he is also driving this absolutely awful car. So it's very hard to say. But I would say that Haas haven't made a mistake, because I would respond to your question with another question, which is, what was their alternative? The alternative was to not take that sponsorship money and not end
Really
up with
struggle.
Mazepin, and maybe not even be in Formula One at all. So it seems like it's a survival decision to me, and thus, as far as they're concerned, it will be the right one. What do you think, Shane?
I don't really have much to add to it. I mean, a lot of people criticise Haas for re-signing Mazepin for the 2022 season, but you've just got to dig a little bit deeper into the reasons as to why. In an ideal world, none of these drivers would be pay drivers or pay to win drivers or pay to enter the sport drivers. They'd all come through on merit and due to previous Formula experience, or from a young age of karting. But the likelihood of that happening is so slim nowadays,
It's
because
an
these
expensive
teams.
business.
It's a very expensive business, and these teams need huge backing to make the team work. And like Alex has just said, Mazepin and his family pay for so much. That sponsorship money pays to keep a couple of hundred people employed, maybe 1,000 people employed back at the factory, or across the whole of the Haas F1 team structure.
I think there's
They're keeping
about
so many
200
people-
odd, maybe 300.
Oh, is that
working
it?
at Haas,
It's
I
just
think. I think
Mercedes
it's
with
about that.
thousands at home.
Yeah, I don't think they're anywhere near.
No.
I don't know if it's. I
But
can't remember. I'm not sure how true it is, but I did see a video where people were showing all the big trucks for the teams arriving, and then it looked like Haas were sort of
A van.
taking their gear out of a van. Now, I don't know
That
how
was
much
at
of
Monaco.
that is selective footage, but it's amusing to think that that's the case.
I remember seeing that. That was filmed at Monaco, I think. I don't know whether that's true or not. But like Alex said, the Mazepin family bring a lot of sponsorship money, and they're keeping a lot of people employed and keeping that 10th team on the grid. That's what we want to see, more teams on the grid, and it's big money which allows us to do that.
Haas
Is
might be a
it
real
his-
competitor next season because of that sort of sustainability. So
You look at Haas in their first season, like they finished their first race in like 5th and 6th. It was like, hold on a second, who's this brand new team from the United States? And then it went a little bit downhill, and now who's that brand new team from Russia? No, it's not. Yeah, a bit of tongue in cheek there. But anyway, is it his number one mission to simply pay off all the other 19 drivers on the grid since his arrival early in the season? It's probably not his mission, but does the media portray Mazepin in a certain light due to his characteristics and controversial nature? Yes. So like we already mentioned earlier, I was very quick to judge Mazepin and how he almost blocked Lewis going through turn 10, and Lewis had to brake to come out of the corner to avoid a collision. But actually, would Mazepin be putting himself in more danger by trying to achieve the same corner on the wet stuff? And this is the kind of stuff which the media jumps to conclusions with, and sometimes you just need to sit down and have a conversation with someone who sees it has the bigger picture, or can look at it from an unbiased point of view. And this is where Alex is quite good, because I'll come in all guns blazing and shouting and screaming about some drivers, and Alex was like, but have you thought about this? And I'll be like, no, but that makes perfect sense.
I don't think that necessarily makes me. Maybe I'm just biased in a different way.
Maybe you're Russian bias. I don't know.
This is a sort of F1 bias equivalent of the one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Like one person's unbiased person is another person's horribly biased person. So I wouldn't like to claim position as the unbiased one.
I'm so sorry.
Sometimes I do like to play devil's advocate, I suppose.
But that's what this podcast is about. It's about bouncing ideas off each other and seeing what we come out with. I've had you change your mind, and you've had me
agree.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
you've changed your mind on some things, and I've changed my mind on some things.
I agree with everything you say, Shane.
That would be it'd be a lot quicker podcast. But thank you very much, Daniel, for getting in contact once again. We really appreciate you tweeting in, and I love knowing that you're going to tweet in every single week and seeing what you have to ask. So thank you very much. The second contactee of the week is RPM legend Dave Dougherty. Thank you so much for tweeting in again. We say this every single week, it's very much appreciated. Always look forward to hearing your thoughts and opinions on the race. And Dave has said, hello RPM, your thoughts on Leclerc from a Mercedes strategy form. Oh, sorry, your thoughts on Leclerc's form and Mercedes strategy. I was going to say, I read that out the first time. It didn't quite make sense. So again, another two-parter. We've already covered Mercedes strategy in quite some detail. Either should have left him out or brought him in 10 laps before. They just shouldn't have done what they did do and bring him in straight in the middle of those two suggestions. They were like, what is going on? But my thoughts on Leclerc, I mentioned it earlier. What a fantastic race from him. That Ferrari has really stepped up its game in the last second half of this season. I think that Ferrari would be stronger on a dry track because that's where they seem to manage their tyres better. But yeah, what a race from Leclerc. I mean, he was leading for one point and, was looking like he was going to finish on the podium quite strongly up until he boxed later on in the race.
Yeah, not the first time he's been in the lead of a Grand Prix with a potential win on the cards at some point. So that Ferrari isn't anywhere near the fastest car on the grid. So he is doing a good job, as is his teammate as well. So I think Ferrari are looking much stronger than they were. It's only a matter of time before that next Leclerc win, I think. So it'd be very exciting to see a Ferrari capable of really competing at the top again, because Leclerc is quite an exciting driver to watch, I think. So seeing him battle with Hamilton and Verstappen and the likes in previous seasons was fantastic. So hope to get to see that a bit more again. And yeah, the Mercedes strategy, we talked about that. They obviously thought that staying out was a bad idea. Maybe they just took that conservative choice because they thought they might lose more positions otherwise. Again, like with the stewarding, there's just so much data that they have that we don't see. They're professionals. I assume they know what they're doing, so they must be basing it on that. But like I said, I think the real decision was that they didn't pit earlier when Bono was calling it in and Hamilton turned it down. So maybe they should have been a bit more forceful to get him to come in. But then again, the trust that they have in Hamilton is a big part of what makes Mercedes what it is, because he is such an exceptional and unique driver. So yeah, tough one to call. I think I'm sure Mercedes will know how to debrief effectively after that one and keep up the battle, because it's definitely not over yet. But thanks very much, Dave. It wouldn't be viewed from the stands without hearing from Dave Dougherty. That is why he's our RPM legend. So, but thanks everyone who gets in touch, and do keep them coming in. Get conversations coming in that start a bit of a discussion. Even controversial questions welcomed. Gets us talking.
Absolutely.
But do get in touch. RacePerMinute on Twitter and RacePerMinute.com contact page. You can also email us info@RacePerMinute.com, etc.
Moving on to driver of the day and championship standings, and I'm quite proud of myself this week because unlike the previous 15 episodes this year, I have come prepared with my driver of the day, and I'm pretty happy with my choice. But because I'm leading this segment, thank you, Alex. For those of you who are listening, Alex did a little clap. And because I'm leading this segment, I'm going to throw the ball straight over to Alex and say, or ask, who is your driver of the day?
He's so proud of your driver of the day pick. You're getting me to say it first.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Sainz was the popular vote. I think he had a great race. Slightly spoilt by his very long pit stop, about 8 seconds stationary, I think it was.
Yep.
Ferrari obviously had a bit of trouble with that. He had a bit of contact with Vettel that he probably should have tried to avoid, although it didn't really cause any major harm by the end of it. Otherwise, it was a very good drive to go from P19 to P8. His teammate Leclerc obviously did very well, leading at one point. Very quietly kept it in contention with the front runners throughout. He's done that quite a few times this season and last season. I think I mentioned before how he seems to have a knack for just quietly sticking around the top of the grid, and you kind of don't really hear much from him. He's just there. As usual, I like to bring up my honourable mentions. I think Stroll had a pretty underrated race to nab some points in P9, whilst his 4-time world champion teammate was absolutely nowhere. Even before he gambled with mediums, it didn't really look like even points were on. for Sebastian Vettel. I'm going to go with Sergio Perez, though, who was, again, a bit underwhelming on Saturday. Half a second off Verstappen, slower than an Alpine, slower than Gasly again. But in the race, he was very strong, had great pace, stayed out of trouble in difficult conditions. His defence against Hamilton was absolutely immense, and was crucial to the closing stages of the race. If Hamilton had got past, that might have totally changed the dynamic of the results for Red Bull as a whole team. It could have put Verstappen under threat from Hamilton. It's ultimately he put it on the podium again, finally, and thoroughly deserved it. So I'm going to go Sergio Perez.
Damn it, I kind of feel like I should have gone first because I'm also going to go with Sergio Perez
Okay.
for all the reasons you mentioned. I was very closely going to give it to Bottas because he's had such a flawless weekend, like we've already mentioned. And Verstappen starting in P2 and finishing in P2 it's not a brilliant performance from him because he's just started and finished in the same position. But Perez and that fight with Lewis Hamilton was so crucial to the final results and obviously closing that gap in the championship standings constructors-wise and helping Verstappen push out a lead or now turn that deficit into a lead this week due to Perez obviously keeping Hamilton behind him for so many laps. And it was just such good racing. It was so good. And I just got this image in my head of Perez going into the pit lane and then coming back onto the track because that's where Hamilton pushed him. It's like, well, no, this is racing. You can't just do that. I'm coming back and I'm going to outpace you on the straight and then outbrake you into turn one. I'm sorry. Where's this guy come from? The second Red Bull seat has finally appeared. I wouldn't want to say Perez is back, but it's so nice to see Perez and Verstappen working in conjunction with one another because we see Mercedes do it time in, time out with Hamilton and Bottas. And, not time in, time out, but we see it happen more often with Mercedes where the pair are working quite well together. Not so often with Red Bull, and we haven't done for years with Red Bull. And here we are, pretty solid result, and hopefully a bunch of confidence for Perez, especially going forward for the remainder of the season. He's got a contract for next year, and hopefully we get to see him fighting the top once again. Nice.
Let's take a look at these standings then. So Max Verstappen leads the Drivers' Championship again, 262.5 points. To Hamilton's 256.5. So there's a bit more of a gap there now. Bottas with 177, P3. Norris still P4, 145. Perez still 5th, 135. There's not really a whole lot of changes going down. Sainz 0.5 of a point ahead of his teammate Leclerc in P7, and Daniel Ricciardo P8 with 95. Gasly 74 P9 and Alonso 58 in P10. So the only really major change is obviously at the top of the championship. That's the really exciting one. What's going on in the bottom? I was going to say bottom 10, but it's bottom 11, isn't it? With Kubica?
Bottom 11, thanks to Kubica. Yep. So we've got Ocon in P11 with 46 points and Vettel behind him with 35 points. Stroll in P13 with 26 with Yuki Tsunoda with 18 points in P14. George Russell has ended his points scoring streak. I think he scored points last week as well. So didn't reach Q3 and didn't score any points. So this could be the end of George. I don't think he's good anymore. He's had all this hype so far and all of a sudden he's dropping off. But clearly a difficult race for Williams. They mentioned it post-race as well that they didn't really enjoy this race. But P15 and P16 for Russell and Latifi respectively. Raikkonen in P17 with 6 points with Giovinazzi in P18 with 1 point. And then you've got Schumacher, Kubica and Mazepin all with 0 points. Kubica obviously finishing in P14, I believe it was. P14 in Italy, which has secured him P20 in the championship. So Mazepin really needs to get P14 or higher.
It's a tough one
really
to do, really, isn't it? I'm considering the car
it's a
that
big
he's driving.
ask.
And both Hasses were lapped twice in this race.
Yeah, then have to have
not
another.
Very often we see cars lapped twice, so.
Well, we see it with Haas quite a lot, don't we?
But we see it with Haas quite a lot this season, I think. But it's going to be pretty tough for him because Schumacher managed to squeeze a P13 in Baku, I think it was, which is why he's there. I don't know if Mazepin's going to be able to do that. Maybe they'll get lucky at some point. But the idea that they'll score any points seems too absurd
ridiculous.
even for this season. to be honest. So
yeah, they need to hit the reset button for 2022 and hope for the best and hope for a lot of money and see what they can do. But let's talk about the constructor standings. At the top, we have Mercedes with 433.5 points compared to Red Bull in P2 with 397.5. So 36 points between them. So actually, given that it's Constructors' Championship, pretty close. If that was the Drivers' Championship, I wouldn't be too worried about the end of the season. But that is Constructors, and each race, there's a big amount of points up for grabs. So all it takes is one car to DNF or Lewis and Max to take each other out, and then it's blown wide open again. McLaren Mercedes holding in P3, which is quite nice with 240 points, with Ferrari closing the gap after a pretty good race weekend of 232.5, so only 7.5 points between them. Who's going to come out on top for P3? I don't know, but I want McLaren to, but it's getting close, and McLaren need to step up their game, considering Ferrari seem to be on the charge. Alpine with 104 points, and that rounds up the top 5. Alex, the bottom 5 on the constructors.
AlphaTauri with 92. It feels like they really should be beating Alpine, really. It feels like that car has a lot more potential overall, but Tsunoda is just not performing at all. He actually did rather well to hold up Hamilton for as long as he did. So he was doing his part for the Red Bull family overall. But after that, I think he had a spin and ended up P14 or something. I think he finished. So it was just another kind of fairly underwhelming performance. Gasly, on the other hand, did very well. Finished P6, I believe he did. So it's another solid result. If only his teammate was, say, finishing just in the points, like even if he was just getting the occasional P9, P10, that would be making all the difference.
But it's
so
just not.
They're going to be feeling pretty disappointed with that, I think. We'll see if they can gain a little bit more near the end. Aston Martin, 61 points, and Williams with 23. Alfa Romeo with 7, and Haas with 0. Again, the bottom sort of 4 places doesn't really feel like they're going to change at all, really. So not too much to look at the bottom of the constructors' table. Well, there it was, the Turkish Grand Prix. It should have been the Japanese Grand Prix, of course, and it's a shame that we don't get to go to Japan again this year. Suzuka, not just a favourite of many fans, and the Japanese fans themselves are absolutely amazing. But a fan favourite, or a driver favourite, I should say, track as well. So it's a shame that we haven't got to see that. But nonetheless, Istanbul Park is a good circuit too. I'd like to see it back on the calendar more permanently. So I don't know if there's any possibility of that. The Formula One and the FIA do seem pretty determined to cram as many races as humanly possible into the calendar. So I don't think it'll be too long before we see 24 or 25 races on the calendar, it seems like. So for what it's worth, that might at least get it onto the calendar more permanently. We'll see. Either way, we will be here to cover it all. So do send us your thoughts or questions to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter. You can get in touch at raceperminute.com. If you're watching on YouTube, you can comment below. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to give us a rating or a like. Press all the buttons and the bells and all that various stuff that helps the mysterious algorithms tell us that you like it and you want to see more. And do please consider subscribing on your podcast app or on YouTube so that you don't miss an episode. And if you really want to support the show, the best way to do that is to follow in the footsteps of our great Nathan Freeman, our patron, who has gone to patreon.com/raceperminute, and where you can donate as little as £1 a month to help keep the quality content coming and receive some lovely rewards. Chat with us on Discord, watch sessions with us, all sorts of things can be found on there. Merch, shout outs, all the rest of it. It helps us keep the show coming. So Shane, as you alluded to earlier, we're going to the US of A next, going to the Circuit of the Americas, a circuit I rather like, and I think should provide some interesting racing. We've always got some good battles there. So I take it you're looking forward to it. I take it it's not a circuit that you have any particular qualms with.
I quite like it. We've had some good races there before. It was Kimi Räikkönen's last race win. Famously for Ferrari, which was just out of this world, and it didn't seem like it felt like a big deal at the time, and still is a big deal. A controversy on the last lap where Max has overtaken someone off the racing line or off the racing track and had to give back a podium position.
Not the first time or last time he had to do that, I think.
Yeah, Lewis has won championships there in the past. Lewis has been dominant there, to be fair, in previous years. Who knows what can happen? It might even rain. Hopefully not, though. We've seen a lot of rain this year, and actually, I didn't think I'd be saying this at the end of this season, but I'd quite like to see a good dry race and see where the pace is actually on the field and see some good battles in the dry. But who knows? I'm looking forward to it, and it's in 2 weeks' time.
Well, we'll see you then. Thanks very much.
See you then.